When I started I Like to Video Games a little less than a year ago now, I had hoped to be able to cover games from a wide variety of perspectives and in a bunch of different ways. Hence the title, I Like to Video Games. Ta-da! Because I don't just like playing video games anymore, I like to watch them, I like to talk about them, I like to collect them and criticize them, analyze them. I like to video games. All of it. So far, in my quest to bring the phrase video games into new grammatical paradigms, I have thus far managed to do the comedic playthrough and a few reviews.
So far, I'm not liking to all of video games.
Which is why today I'm going to be doing the very first discussion episode of I Like to Video Games. Theory, execution, hell, I might even get super serious and talk about social implications from time to time. But today is not that day. Today, sirs and madams, we're going to be talking about QuickTime events. Yay! As far as you're all aware, I am staunchly against the industry's lax policies towards QTE proliferation. I will not abide by these half-baked mechanics, taking jobs away from tried and true gameplay methods. They are the very tool of the devil! Everything that's wrong with gaming today, way worse than anything else you can come up with. DRM, the sugar on my grapefruit in the morning. Locked on disc content, might as well be a massage. EA, well, compared to QuickTime events, they're an okay developer. I really can't give them that much, even hypothetically. Do you see how much I hate QuickTime events? They drove me to say that EA wasn't terrible. I said that shit. I'll never be able to unsay it. QuickTime events ruin everything they touch. End of story. Except for Resident Evil 4 and Heavy Rain, those games were awesome. So since I'm undermining my own vitriol with quiet excuses for my select favorite titles, I figured now would be a good time to think through and explain my thoughts on the finer points of QuickTime events to justify my own hypocrisy. What the? Thus far, in my tenure as producerman for I Like to Video Games, I have reviewed 2 games which featured QuickTime events very prominently, and the results have been mixed. But it's important to note, however, that neither of these games claim or use QuickTime events as their chief mechanic. Very few games do. In fact, I can only really think of 2 that I've played, and yet these things are all over the place, or at least they were. I haven't seen them much around lately, but for a time, they really were the bread and butter of the AAA industry. They were like the bullet time of game design. Not quite as cool, but about as useful. QuickTime erasers have been around since the 80s, being used in interactive laserdisc movies. Yeah, who remembers those things? I don't. They were used to give the player the illusion of control over an interactive movie of sorts, and essentially make games with much more detailed and animated graphics in comparison to the games that skimped on the graphics to build up gameplay elements. Jump ahead to the recent now, QuickTime events came back into fashion around this time, with Shenmue in 2000 and Resident Evil 4 in 2005. Ever since then, they're everywhere! Now, all of those comparisons I made before, those are what you call hyperbole. When I see quickly tailored evening wear being used in games, I don't actually think they're the tool of the devil. They look nothing like a pitchfork. I just see them being used wrong. Like, what the hell even is this? All these games, boring, uninspired. Like, what are the QuickTime things for? I don't know. But these right here, aces. This one, sort of. We'll get to that. So what's the deal with all of these games that don't use them as a core mechanic and just sort of have quick temporary eviscerations hanging on for the ride? Why do some of them bomb so hard but some get a pass? And more importantly, why am I bringing it up? It's not like QTE is a new issue. The gamers have spoken. The reviewers have yelled. What kind of acidic criticism could I possibly have to level at this already beaten to death non-issue that will yield any kind of new ground to break? Well, put away your issue-beaten sticks and pour some base on that acid, because today, I'm here to talk to you about why I like QuickTime events. Sort of. The way I see it, games use quiet time elephants in 3 different ways. Building the game, expanding the game, and enhancing the game. Games like Heavy Rain, Shenmue, and Interhype Proper Thingy have their entire gameplay based around these things. Heavy Rain is not an action game. There's no pew 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 pew. Come in, Alpha Team. Tango spotted. It's more like, this room's nice. This room's nice too. I wonder if this room's gonna be... Hey, it is nice. And now I'm going for a walk through these virtual flowers.
And these people!
Jason!
Your actions are largely circumstantial, and the controls are limiting. It's like a less usable version of the original Resident Evil. You have to hold R2 to move forward and steer with the stick, and if the camera changes, you're suddenly caught holding the stick the wrong direction. They're so limiting, it's hard to walk in a straight line some of the time. Super glad they didn't have a sobriety test minigame. But what happens when some jerk-ass decides he needs to get into a fight with me? You wanna fight, asshole? Well, you better watch out, because I'm gonna follow instructions very carefully.
Seriously, if this were any other game, I'd be wailing on you so hard Greenpeace would get involved.
Now, Resident Evil 4 was the first game I ever played with QuickTime events. It has a similar approach to Heavy Rain in some ways, but it's a bit more accessible. The first QTE you come across is the first falling boulder that can auto-drop on you in the village. This was a nice way to introduce the concept. Here, the game gives you ample time to look at the very obvious action prompt on the screen, and they made sure to use a button that, by way of the design of the controller, you were sure to have your thumb on to begin with. Eventually, once we figured out that stuff is going to jump out at us, they start turning the stress up to 11 and really testing our reflexes. The regular controls for this game are fluid and basic enough. Pull out your gun, shoot, hold B to run, start to pause, open inventory, look at a boss. Hey, that rhymed. I mean, hey, Leon even moves when you hold the stick a certain direction, just like a normal video person. Although what's not like a normal video person is how Leon apparently hasn't figured out how to climb down ladders. Oh gosh, my knees. Painful to watch. These controls are functional. You can fight enemies, pick up unearthly beacons of light, and ignore your parents by talking to the creepiest stranger out there.
Welcome.
Repeatedly.
Welcome.
All with relative ease, but nothing in this basic moveset is all that strenuous. You know, except for the knee pain. He only ever runs at a light jog, he shoots things instead of reaching for them, and, like, really, do you even knife? Leon basically doesn't exert himself, the lazy bastard. At least until one of these happens. When I played this game for the first time, I didn't really think twice about the quandary-teasing exaggerators. Even though they were new and strange to me, they always came up right when it was time for Leon to physically exert himself or react to something happening really, really fast. It seemed really, really appropriate. Leon normally only runs about as fast as I want to run constantly, and despite what people think about how they walk in comparison to this, most people don't walk around like this either. No. This seems a bit more appropriate, but when it's time to sprint, go, go, go! Pulling himself up from the brink of death? Yeah, I'll tap to that. Turning a crank? I'm fairly certain Leon doesn't have a degree in crank turning, so it's not like it's second nature to him. And quick question, how often do you have to dodge a knife that was just thrown at your face? Not often, I bet, and that's probably how Leon would have answered the question, at least until this happened. Between sprinting, climbing, dodging knives, pincers, and death by drowning, these QuickTime events represent a very real set of capabilities that Leon has that go above and beyond the scope of the basic controls, which the developers thankfully kept simple and easy to use. In essence, expanding the game. Also, this happens. Now, I'm sure a lot of you are going to point out that this could very well apply to every QuickTime offender out there. I suppose it's true, as expanding and enhancing the game seem pretty similar, but I'm not sure that they are when you get down to it. Let's look at Castlevania Lords of Shadow, because I just can't leave that game alone, the poor thing. And no, I didn't feel like putting myself through all this again just to get high-def footage, so deal with it. It takes ideas out of the God of War playbook, namely using QTE for finishing off enemies, and, well, pretty much everything else too, actually. And you could make the argument that Gabriel doesn't have a stab move in his basic controls that he can just do willy-nilly, so it stands to reason that Gabriel and Leon have the same limitations. They're basically brothers! But no. Look at this QTE cutscene. It's big, it's sprawling, it's exciting, or at least it would be if I didn't have to keep watching those stupid circles as though my life depended on it, although I guess it kinda does. And if you're gonna use the argument that these QuickTime events are used as an excuse to add more cinematics that look cool, no, wrong. What am I looking at here? Hell, I don't even notice the big awesome display of manly aggression going on because I'm too busy watching for these circles like I'm playing whack-a-mole.
Whack-a-mole.
In this case, Resident Evil 4 has the added benefit of being made for a console with a cartoony-looking controller. Originally. In that infamous knife fight scene with Krauser, I can still watch the really cool fight choreography because there are only ever 2 QTE prompts that come up, and they are very distinctly colored. Green and red, or not green and not red. Easy, assuming you're not colorblind. I can basically see which I'm supposed to use out of the corner of my eye, making this whole scene watchable and more accessible. And in the end, there was seriously no need for Gabriel to go beyond the scope of the controls here. Really? You really think I needed a special event to do that? Look at what I was doing right before that started.
Oh yeah, I got this rhythmic gymnastics thing down, baby.
The reason this works in RE4 is because Leon can do this sort of thing, but it's not a normal thing for him to do. There's a very good chance he might get it wrong, and he's your avatar, so you have to might get it wrong too. It adds an extra dimension of interactivity and player involvement, or immersion, if you want to use that played out buzzword. In Castlevania, I'm not that worried. If I'm supposed to be worried that Gabriel might not complete this thing, then I should also be worried about cutting my own damn head off every time I hit square. That would suck. So, Resident Evil, expanding the game. Castlevania, enhancing the game. And for the record, the whole idea of enhancing the game with QuickTime events seems kind of problematic to me. In RE4, the QTE felt like they had weight and meaning. They were very rarely used as some kind of mundane activity. Games that try to enhance the game with QTE just seem to be doing it because they think it'll make them look cool. And sometimes it is cool. I mean, God of War did this well enough. The prompts were obvious and color-coded, but after a while I started to wonder why the QTE had to basically be the same kinds of button sequences over and over. They weren't that much more exciting than the basic attacks, so I kind of just stopped caring, or trying, and started wondering why they couldn't have come up with some alternatives. But that would mean thinking up new stuff, and that's hard, and nobody's done it for us yet! Yes, they have. Well, they have now, at least. It's called Bayonetta. I just recently reviewed this game, and for those of you who watched the episode, you'll recall that I reacted to the QuickTime events pretty predictably. But I'm including Bayonetta in this discussion because the game's approach to QTE is interestingly varied. To start, we get single command initiation attacks. Nothing too offensive. But then we get the game's first actual QTE, like 3 hours into the game, and it's not very well done. This is where I kind of started to get frustrated, but I did point out that eventually the game more or less figures itself out. In situations like this, the game alters the QTE execution a bit, and has you doing souped up versions of normal actions, and even has you pushing the appropriate buttons. We're making progress! But in the end, Bayonetta does something drastically different that I think might be the answer to my problem. Here, in this boss fight, we can see the perfect example of what I'm about to talk about. And what I'm about to talk about is running up the boss's tentacles. There, I said it! This felt like a more developed version of QTE, one that I can totally get behind. When this sequence starts, the player must begin guiding Bayonetta along the way while dodging defensive moves from the boss in order to reach the goal and do some damage. During this sequence, Bayonetta can pretty much move freely, but only within the confines of what the game is allowing at that moment. Everything still controls perfectly normally, like dodging and jumping, turning into a panther. Still so cool! But what's different is that the only direction for Bayonetta to move is forward, effectively narrowing the scope of gameplay in order to focus our actions and movements into a specific task, almost making it more cinematic. Hey, that's like what QuickTime Events is trying to do. I'm not a game designer, so I'm not gonna run around saying that implementing stuff like this instead of stuff like this is the easiest thing in the world. In fact, I'm guessing it'd be pretty damn hard. I mean, they might have to think creatively after all, but does this mean I want every game to have this instead of the more traditional QTE? Well, no. Some games have done it right. I think the key is making the QTE feel natural and like it has purpose, not just another way for designers to try and appeal to our ADD-addled brains. We know they can be used well, and boy do we ever know they can be used in a half-assed capacity. Half-passity? Half-passed? So, to all you game developers out there, do better things. This is seriously the ending we're going with. Hey everybody, that was a video. If you want to know when I make more of these things, then you should hit that subscribe button. It's down there somewhere. You know what? I'll put one here too for your convenience. Do yourself a favor, be informed. More videos are coming. In the meantime, why not take a look at my Bayonetta review? Or see why I just can't stop picking on Lords of Shadow. I also have Facebook and Twitter. Like and follow if you want to see how easily distracted I am. See you next time!